The first snow of December drifted across the city like ash from a silent fire, settling over neon signs, frozen gutters, and crowded sidewalks where people hurried with their collars raised and their eyes fixed ahead, too busy to notice the man sleeping beneath the flickering pharmacy light across from the subway station. His beard was uneven, his coat was torn at the sleeves, and one of his boots had been repaired with silver tape that reflected passing headlights, yet despite the grime and exhaustion hanging from him like another layer of clothing, there was something strangely composed about the way he sat against the brick wall, watching the city with patient stillness instead of desperation. Most people ignored him. A few dropped coins into the paper cup beside him without making eye contact. One teenage boy filmed him briefly for a joke before running away laughing. The only person who stopped long enough to ask if he had eaten was Rachel Lynn, who stepped out of the burger shop at 11:30 each night carrying a bag of leftover fries and unsold sandwiches because she hated throwing food away while people were hungry. "You again," she said that evening, crouching beside him while snow gathered on her dark ponytail. "You skipped yesterday." The man looked up slowly, eyes sharp beneath tangled hair. "Maybe I found somewhere warmer." "Liar. You look half frozen." She handed him the bag. "Eat before it turns into a brick." He accepted it after a pause. "Why do you care?" Rachel shrugged. "Because somebody should." Then she walked away before he could answer, her sneakers crunching through slush as the automatic restaurant lights blinked behind her. The man watched her disappear into the narrow side street, then lowered his gaze to the paper bag. Inside, beneath the sandwiches, was a folded pair of wool gloves. He stared at them for a long moment before slipping them on. 2 blocks away, a black SUV idled beside the curb while a tense-looking assistant in a tailored coat lowered binoculars with visible relief. He took them, the assistant muttered into his phone. "Yes, Mr. Shaw is still there." The voice on the other end exploded with frustration loud enough to leak from the speaker. 3 weeks. 3 weeks he's vanished before the biggest award season of his career and now he's eating discarded fries in an alley? He refuses to return. Then drag him back. You know nobody can drag Sean Shaw anywhere. The assistant glanced again toward the alley where the disguised actor sat beneath falling snow. Especially not after what happened. Across the city, Rachel climbed the stairs to the apartment she shared with her grandmother, her feet aching from 12 hours of work. The hallway smelled of old soup and laundry detergent. Inside, warm yellow light spilled from the tiny kitchen where her grandmother sat wrapped in blankets watching an old romance drama with the volume too loud. "You're late," the old woman scolded gently. "Again. Holiday rush." Rachel kissed her forehead and began preparing tea. "Did you take your medicine? Did you call your fiancé?" Rachel smile dimmed slightly. "Not tonight." Her grandmother narrowed suspicious eyes. "June should visit more. A wedding is in 2 weeks. Why is that boy always busy?" Rachel stirred the tea too quickly, splashing hot water over the counter. "He's helping launch the new hotel branch." The old woman sighed. "Your grandfather worked 3 jobs and still walked me home every evening." Rachel forced a laugh and changed the subject, but after midnight while her grandmother slept, she sat alone beside the window scrolling through unanswered messages to her fiancé Daniel June. The engagement photo on her lock screen showed him smiling confidently in an expensive suit while she leaned against his shoulder beneath spring cherry blossoms. Everyone had called them lucky. Daniel came from a wealthy business family. Rachel had no parents, no degree, and no future. Beyond late-night shifts and overdue utility bills, yet somehow she had ended up with a handsome fiancé who promised to take care of her forever. At least that was what she had believed until small things began changing. Delayed replies. Secret phone calls. Cancelled dinners. Perfume on his collars that wasn't hers. Rachel had tried ignoring the unease because doubt felt uglier than trust. 3 days later, she learned exactly how ugly trust could become. She arrived at the luxury hotel ballroom carrying handwritten seating cards because Daniel had insisted on reviewing wedding details personally. The ballroom doors were partly open. Laughter echoed inside. Rachel smiled faintly at the familiar sound of her cousin Vivian's voice, but as she stepped closer, the smile froze on her face. Vivian stood against the piano wearing Rachel's bridal veil while Daniel wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "Your cousin still thinks I'm working late meetings," Daniel said between kisses. Vivian laughed. "Maybe you should marry her after all. She practically worships you." "Please. Rachel's sweet, but she's exhausting. Always worrying whether she belongs in my world." "And does she?" "Not even close." Rachel's fingers loosened. The seating cards scattered across the polished floor like fallen leaves. Daniel turned first. His expression emptied in pure shock before hardening instantly into irritation instead of guilt. Vivian removed the veil slowly, almost lazily, as though she had been interrupted during entertainment rather than caught betraying family. "Rachel," Daniel said, "you should have called before coming." Rachel stared at him, unable to process how calmly he spoke. "How long?" she whispered. Vivian crossed her arms. 6 months. The answer struck harder than the confession itself because Vivian sounded proud. Rachel laughed once in disbelief, then another laugh burst out sharper and louder until tears blurred her vision. "My wedding veil?" she asked hoarsely. "Seriously?" Daniel stepped forward. "Lower your voice." "Lower my..." She grabbed a crystal centerpiece from the nearby table and hurled it across the ballroom. It shattered against the wall with a violent crash that echoed through the empty hall. "You were sleeping with my cousin while planning our wedding?" Vivian rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic." Rachel lunged at her instantly. Chairs toppled as the two women crashed into the table. Vivian screamed when Rachel ripped the veil away and slapped her hard enough to send an earring skidding across the floor. Daniel grabbed Rachel's arms from behind, dragging her backward. "Stop acting insane," he shouted. Rachel twisted free and stared at him with raw disbelief. "You cheated on me and I'm insane?" Her chest heaved violently. "I worked double shifts to help pay for this wedding while you two laughed at me." Vivian adjusted her hair coldly. "Honestly, Rachel, you should thank me. You were never going to survive in his circle anyway." Rachel looked at her cousin, remembering childhood birthdays, shared secrets, years of trust, and suddenly all those memories felt rotten. She picked up the engagement ring from her finger and threw it directly at Daniel's face. It struck his cheek before disappearing beneath the tables. "Keep your circle," she said quietly. Then she walked out before either of them could answer, though once the elevator doors closed, she collapsed against the mirrored wall, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. Outside, rain had replaced the snow. Rachel wandered for nearly an hour without direction until she found herself back near the subway station. The homeless man sat beneath the pharmacy light again, drinking coffee from a paper cup. He noticed her swollen eyes immediately. "You look worse than me tonight," he said. Rachel laughed bitterly. "That's impressive." He studied her silently as she sank onto the curb beside him, uncaring that icy water soaked through her jeans. "Want fries?" she asked numbly. "I don't have any today." "Then what are you offering?" She stared at the traffic. "Conversation, maybe." He handed her the coffee without hesitation. It was still warm. Rachel took a sip before realizing it was probably his only drink. "Sorry," she murmured, trying to hand it back. "Keep it." His voice carried quiet authority despite his appearance. "What happened?" Rachel surprised herself by answering honestly. Maybe because strangers felt safer than people who claimed to love her. She explained everything in fragmented sentences while taxis splashed through puddles nearby. Sean listened without interruption, his face unreadable beneath his beard. When she finished, silence stretched between them until he finally asked, "What hurts more? Losing him or being humiliated?" Rachel opened her mouth automatically to say losing him, but the truth stopped her. "The humiliation," she admitted. "Everyone warned me his family looked down on me. I defended him every single time." Her laugh trembled. "Turns out they were right." Sean tilted his head slightly. "No. They were cruel." "That's different." Rachel glanced at him for the first time. Even exhausted and disheveled, his eyes held unusual steadiness. "You talk like someone who knows rich people." "I know masks," he replied. Before she could ask what he meant, her phone rang. The hospital number on the screen turned her blood cold. 2 hours later, Rachel sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed while machines beeped steadily in the dim room. The old woman looked smaller than ever beneath pale blankets. Just exhaustion, the doctor had claimed, but Rachel saw the fear hidden behind his careful tone. Her grandmother squeezed her hand weakly. "Did you finalize the wedding flowers?" Rachel's throat tightened instantly. She couldn't destroy her grandmother's happiness now, not when the old woman's heart condition had worsened suddenly. "Almost," Rachel lied softly. Her grandmother smiled faintly. "Good. I want to see you married before I go." Rachel forced herself not to cry. The next morning, Daniel's mother arrived at the hospital dressed in cream wool and diamonds, carrying neither flowers nor sympathy. She closed the room door behind her and placed an envelope onto the bedside table. "Daniel explained the unfortunate misunderstanding," she said coolly. "This compensation should prevent unnecessary scenes." Rachel stared at the envelope. "Money." Her hands began shaking. "Get out. You should think carefully. Public embarrassment would damage everyone involved, especially a girl from your background." Rachel rose slowly from her chair. "Get out before I forget you're somebody's mother." Daniel's mother looked disgusted. "This attitude is precisely why you were unsuitable." She walked away moments later, but Rachel remained trembling beside the window long after. She did not notice Sean standing across the street outside the hospital entrance wearing a dark hoodie and cap instead of his ragged coat, speaking quietly into a phone. "I want every pending tax investigation into the June family reopened by tomorrow," he said. "And find out which reporters covered Daniel's last hotel acquisition scandal." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sean, are you finally coming back?" Sean watched Rachel through the hospital window. "Not yet." That evening, Rachel returned to the subway station carrying groceries for her grandmother. She found the homeless man feeding pieces of bread to pigeons beside the bench. "You clean up fast," she remarked, noticing the fresh hoodie. He smirked slightly. "Borrowed clothes." Rachel sat beside him heavily. "My grandma thinks I'm still getting married." "Are you?" She laughed once. "To who? The cheating snake?" Sean remained quiet. Snow drifted around them while commuters rushed past. Then Rachel suddenly turned toward him with a strange expression. "Marry me." He blinked. "That's a terrible proposal." "I'm serious. You don't even know my name." "Do you know mine?" "Rachel Lynn." She stared. "How do you wear your work badge everywhere?" He nodded toward the fast food logo hanging from her bag. Rachel exhaled sharply. "Fine. Homeless guy, I need a husband for exactly 3 months so my grandmother can stop worrying herself into the grave. In return, I'll give you food, a warm place to sleep, and enough money to survive winter." Sean's eyes narrowed with amusement. "You're offering a contract marriage to a stranger beside a subway station. It sounds worse when you say it out loud." "Good." Before she could respond further, rapid footsteps approached. One of Sean's assistants entered looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "Mr. Shaw," he said breathlessly, "the morning market reports just came in." Sean raised an eyebrow slightly. "And?" "After Chairman Park's arrest, your company shares rebounded 12% overnight." Rachel frowned. Why would investors react positively to all this chaos? The assistant almost smiled. "Because the public's overwhelmingly supporting Mr. Shaw now." He handed over a tablet displaying endless headlines. "Sean Shaw exposes corruption network. Actor risks career to protect ordinary woman. Entertainment industry scandal explodes after executive arrest." Rachel stared in disbelief. "People are actually on our side?" "Mostly," the assistant admitted carefully. "Though several tabloids are now referring to you as the Cinderella of Seoul." Rachel looked horrified. Absolutely not. Sean laughed outright. That one's staying. Sean. Too late. The internet has decided. Rachel grabbed the tablet and nearly choked reading trending hashtags dedicated entirely to her grandmother. Hashtag DUMPLNGGRANDMADFANSSLOVE had somehow become internationally popular overnight after guests leaked clips from the engagement dinner confrontation. Sean leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. Your grandmother has fan accounts now. Rachel stared blankly. Humanity was a mistake. Sean looked happier than she had ever seen him. Not just amused, lighter somehow. Like the crushing isolation surrounding him for months had finally cracked open enough to let warmth back in. The assistant hesitated before speaking again. There's one more thing. Sean immediately noticed his tone. What? Director Kwan was arrested 30 minutes ago. Silence fell instantly. Rachel watched Sean's entire body still. On what charges? He asked quietly. Witness intimidation, financial corruption, and multiple assault allegations from former actresses. The assistant looked almost stunned himself. 3 women came forward overnight after Chairman Park's arrest. Sean said nothing. Rachel studied his face carefully and realized he wasn't relieved exactly. He looked overwhelmed. The assistant continued gently, the police commissioner publicly acknowledged your testimony helped reopen the investigation. After he left, silence returned to the penthouse. Sean remained motionless beside the windows for several long seconds. Rachel touched his arm softly. Hey! He looked at her slowly. His eyes had gone suspiciously bright. She should have lived to see this, he said quietly. Rachel understood immediately he meant Mina. Sean laughed once under his breath, but emotion roughened the sound painfully. She spent months convinced nobody would believe her. Rachel stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him without speaking. Sean held her tightly almost instantly, face pressing briefly against her hair while years of exhaustion seemed to pour silently out of him all at once. You did it, Rachel whispered softly. No, Sean murmured. They did. The women who came forward. He closed his eyes briefly. I just got loud enough that people finally listened. Rachel held him a little tighter. For the first time since meeting him, she felt the full weight Sean had been carrying beneath his composure, the guilt, the grief, the fury, the loneliness. And she understood why disappearing into anonymity had once seemed easier than surviving fame. But now things were changing. Slowly. Painfully. Yet genuinely. Hours later, after the sun fully rose and the city buzzed with nonstop scandal updates, Rachel finally convinced Sean to sleep. He had been awake nearly 40 hours by then, still trying to handle legal calls from bed until she physically removed the phone from his hand. You're impossible, he muttered tiredly while she pulled the blankets over him. And you're delirious. Sean caught her wrist before she could walk away. Stay. The quiet vulnerability in the single word undid her instantly. Rachel slipped beside him carefully while Sean wrapped one exhausted arm around her waist almost immediately, like someone seeking reassurance unconsciously. Within minutes his breathing finally deepened into real sleep. Rachel lay awake longer watching morning light move slowly across the room. Sean looked younger asleep somehow. Less guarded. The harsh lines of constant vigilance softened entirely. Rachel brushed one strand of hair gently away from his forehead and felt her chest tighten unexpectedly with affection so deep it frightened her slightly. A month ago she had been planning a wedding built on obligation and insecurity. Now she lay beside a man who saw every fragile part of her and treated it gently instead of exploiting it. Her phone vibrated quietly on the nightstand. Rachel checked the message carefully to avoid waking Sean. The sender name made her stomach tighten. Vivian. After several seconds of hesitation, Rachel opened it. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But Daniel lied to both of us. I was cruel to you because I envied you. Grandma once said you loved people without calculating what you'd gain first. I thought that made you weak. I think now maybe it made you stronger than me. Rachel stared at the message silently while Sean slept beside her. She felt no immediate anger anymore, only sadness for how badly both of them had lost themselves chasing validation from terrible people. Another message arrived seconds later. I'm leaving the city for a while. Tell Grandma I'm sorry. Rachel locked the phone without replying yet. Some wounds needed more than one night to untangle. Beside her, Sean shifted slightly in his sleep and tightened his arm around her instinctively. Rachel smiled faintly and settled closer against him. Outside, the snow finally stopped falling over the city for the first time in days. And inside the quiet penthouse above the river, two people who had met through loneliness and accident slowly began building something neither of them had expected to find again: peace. Rachel woke several hours later to the unfamiliar sensation of complete silence. No reporters shouting outside the building, no frantic assistants rushing through hallways, no emergency alarms or phone calls dragging Sean back into crisis. Just soft afternoon light spilling across the bedroom and the steady warmth of Sean asleep beside her, one arm still wrapped securely around her waist as if even unconsciousness refused to let her drift too far away. For a moment she simply lay there watching him. The intimidating film emperor worshipped by millions currently slept with his hair falling messily across his forehead and a tiny crease between his brows that only appeared when he was deeply exhausted. Rachel reached out carefully and smoothed it away with her thumb before she could overthink the gesture. Sean's eyes opened immediately. Rachel jumped. You were asleep. His voice came rough from exhaustion and sleep. Years of paparazzi. I wake up easily. But instead of moving away, he caught her hand gently and pressed a lazy kiss against her palm before settling back against the pillow. Rachel felt heat rush into her face instantly. That's unfair. Sean opened one eye slightly. What is? Looking attractive while barely conscious. He smiled faintly. You're blushing. You're manipulative. Correct. Rachel laughed softly despite herself. Sean studied her quietly for a second longer, expression warming. You stayed. The simple sincerity in his voice made something tighten painfully in her chest. You asked me to. Sean nodded once, almost like he still found that surprising. Then his stomach growled loudly enough to interrupt the moment completely. Rachel blinked. Sean closed his eyes again with visible disappointment. I was having a dignified emotional scene. Rachel burst into laughter so hard she nearly fell off the bed. 20 minutes later she stood barefoot in the penthouse kitchen attempting to make soup while Sean sat at the counter half awake wearing black sweatpants and an old sweater that somehow made him look even more dangerously attractive than expensive suits ever had. Why are you staring at me? Rachel asked suspiciously while chopping vegetables. Sean rested his chin against one hand lazily. You're aggressively domestic. That's not a compliment. It is to me. Rachel tried ignoring how warm those words made her feel. You know rich people can hire chefs. Chefs don't glare at me while seasoning broth. Maybe they should. Sean smiled quietly and continued watching her with unsettling focus. Rachel finally pointed the knife toward him. You're being weird. I'm observing. Like a scientist? Like a man realizing he might want this forever. Rachel nearly dropped the knife directly into the soup. Sean looked deeply satisfied with himself afterward. Before she could retaliate verbally, the kitchen doors swung open and her grandmother marched inside wrapped dramatically in blankets despite looking healthier than everyone else combined. There you are, she announced. Your security guards tried stopping me from entering. Sean straightened immediately. You were supposed to rest. Resting is boring. The old woman spotted the soup pot and nodded approvingly. Good. Feed him properly before he disappears again. Rachel nearly choked. Grandma. Her grandmother ignored her completely and settled onto a stool beside Sean like they had known each other for years. You look happier today, she informed him bluntly. Sean glanced toward Rachel briefly before answering softly, I am. The old woman hummed knowingly. Good. Sad people make terrible husbands. Rachel covered her face in surrender.
Can we go one meal without discussing marriage?
No, her grandmother replied instantly.
Sean looked amused. I appreciate her consistency.
Rachel narrowed her eyes at both traitors while finishing the soup. Yet beneath the embarrassment, warmth spread steadily through her chest watching Sean interact so naturally with the only family she had left. He listened attentively when her grandmother complained about hospital food. He refilled her tea without being asked. He even tolerated being scolded about sleeping habits with suspicious patience. Nobody looking at them now would guess this relationship began as a desperate contract between strangers. Halfway through lunch, Sean's phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter.
He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That seems important. Sean sighed heavily before checking the screen. His expression flattened instantly. Unfortunately, yes. What happened now? Sean handed her the phone. A live entertainment broadcast filled the screen. At the center sat a glamorous actress Rachel recognized immediately from movie posters and interviews. Celeste Kong. One of the country's biggest stars. The headline beneath her read, actress claims secret relationship with Sean Shaw. Rachel blinked slowly. Oh. Sean already looked exhausted again. On screen, Celeste dabbed elegantly at non-existent tears while reporters leaned forward eagerly. Sean has been emotionally unstable since Mina's death, she said softly. I stayed silent to protect him, but seeing him manipulated publicly by another woman, Rachel stared at the television in disbelief. Wow. Sean pinched the bridge of his nose. I haven't spoken to Celeste in almost 8 months. The actress continued dramatically, I worry certain people are exploiting Sean's vulnerable mental state for financial gain. Rachel looked up slowly. Did she just call me a gold digger on live television? Indirectly, Sean muttered. How considerate. Her grandmother scoffed loudly from the table. That woman's eyelashes looked dishonest. Rachel nearly inhaled soup. Sean's phone exploded again with incoming calls. You should respond, Rachel said carefully. If you ignore this, people might believe her. Sean's jaw tightened slightly. That's exactly why she's doing it. Were you actually together? Rachel asked, trying unsuccessfully to sound casual. Sean noticed immediately. You're jealous. I'm evaluating. Dangerously adorable distinction. Rachel crossed her arms. Answer the question. Sean leaned back in his chair studying her with visible amusement now despite the situation. Celeste and I went on 3 dates arranged by our management teams. That sounds horrifying. It was. He took a sip of tea calmly. She spent 40 minutes explaining luxury horse therapy. Rachel blinked. That's a real thing? Apparently wealthy people pay emotional support horses to judge them. Even her grandmother looked confused by that sentence. Rachel tried remaining serious but failed. So no tragic secret romance? No. Sean's expression softened slightly. I've never loved anyone in this industry. Rachel's heartbeat quickened annoyingly again. Sean stood and walked toward her slowly until he stopped directly beside her chair. You know what the funny part is? Rachel looked up cautiously. What? Before you, I honestly thought relationships were mostly performance. His fingers brushed lightly against the back of her chair. Then you offered me half your fries because you thought I looked cold. Rachel swallowed hard. You did look cold. Sean smiled faintly. Yeah. The television suddenly grew louder again as the broadcast host announced breaking updates. Sources close to Shaw Entertainment now suggest Rachel Lynn may have intentionally pursued Sean Shaw after recognizing his identity months earlier. Rachel froze. Sean's expression darkened immediately. That's false. Obviously, Rachel muttered. I thought you were homeless. Her grandmother looked offended on Sean's behalf. A very handsome homeless man. Sean rubbed his forehead tiredly. Celeste's team is pushing coordinated media narratives. Rachel stood slowly. Then fight back.
Sean looked at her carefully.
Rachel, once we escalate publicly, there's no returning to privacy. Sean.
She stepped closer. I lost privacy when reporters chased my grandmother into an ambulance.
He held her gaze silently. Rachel continued more softly, you spent months protecting everyone else while people lied about you.
Her eyes sharpened slightly.
I'm not watching that happen again. Something emotional flickered across Sean's face.
Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the polished celebrity smile cameras loved.
Something warmer. Proud almost. You're terrifying when loyal. Good.
Her grandmother slapped the table approvingly.
That's my granddaughter. An hour later the penthouse transformed into a media war room.
Lawyers, publicists, investigators, and executives crowded around conference tables while giant screens tracked social media reactions in real time. Rachel sat beside Sean at the center of the chaos, trying not to look overwhelmed. One publicist adjusted her glasses nervously.
Miss Kane's interview gained 40 million views already. Another executive looked grim. Several sponsors are demanding clarification about Sean's personal relationships. Rachel frowned. Why do sponsors care who he dates? Everyone in the room looked at her simultaneously. Sean answered gently, because celebrity culture is deeply unhealthy. That's insane. Correct again.
His legal advisor slid documents across the table.
We can pursue defamation if necessary. Sean barely glanced at them. Not yet.
Rachel looked toward him.
Why not? Sean leaned back thoughtfully. Because Celeste isn't the real problem.
The room quieted instantly. Someone's feeding her information, he continued. She's too calculated to risk public humiliation unless promised protection. One assistant suddenly spoke up from the far end of the room.
Sir. Sean looked over. What? The assistant hesitated. Financial investigators found recent payments linking Celeste's agency to former board members connected with Chairman Park.
Rachel stared.
They're using her?
Most likely, Sean said calmly.
If they can't destroy me through legal pressure, they'll attack credibility instead. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. Your world is exhausting.
Sean looked at her softly.
I know. Another silence followed before Rachel suddenly stood up.
Everyone turned toward her.
Can I ask something? Sean nodded cautiously. Rachel crossed her arms. Why are we letting them define the story? The executives blinked. Excuse me?
Rachel looked around the room. These people keep attacking Sean because they think he'll stay quiet to protect his image. She glanced toward Sean briefly.
But his silence never protected him anyway. Sean watched her closely now.
Rachel continued, voice growing steadier. So why not tell the truth ourselves? One executive looked skeptical. Miss Lynn, public narratives require careful management.
No, Rachel replied sharply.
Lies require management. Truth just requires courage.
Complete silence filled the conference room. Sean
stared at her for several long seconds before laughing quietly under his breath. There she is.
Rachel frowned slightly. What?
The woman who offered marriage to a stranger because everyone else was too cowardly to help. Warmth spread across her face immediately. Sean stood slowly, then looked toward his public relations team.
Schedule a live press conference.
The room erupted instantly with alarmed objections. Sir, that's too risky, the media climate is unstable, we need additional containment strategy. Sean raised one hand and silence returned immediately. Then he looked directly at Rachel while answering them all at once.
No more hiding.
And somewhere deep inside herself, Rachel realized she no longer wanted to hide either.
What happens after 3 months?
Divorce. Sean looked toward the glowing city skyline, thinking of paparazzi hunting him across the country, studio executives demanding explanations, and the loneliness that had driven him into anonymity after discovering the people around him loved fame more than the man himself. Rachel waited nervously, embarrassed by her own desperation.
Finally he asked, "Would your grandmother approve?"
"She'd approve if I married a mailbox." That earned the first genuine laugh from him, low and warm and startlingly attractive beneath his rough appearance.
Rachel stared in surprise. Even through the beard and exhaustion, his smile transformed his entire face.
Sean noticed her staring and quickly looked away.
"You still haven't told me your name," she said softly. A brief pause followed. "Sean," he answered at last. "Just Sean." "Okay, Sean."
Rachel extended her hand.
"Deal?"
He looked at her small cold hand for several seconds before shaking it firmly.
"Deal."
Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked half a block away where Sean's horrified assistant nearly dropped his phone watching one of the most famous actors in the country agree to marry a fast food cashier while disguised as a homeless man beneath falling snow. Rachel spent the entire walk home convincing herself she had not completely lost her mind, though every few minutes she glanced sideways at Sean trudging beside her with his hands in the pockets of his worn coat and wondered whether exhaustion had finally damaged her judgment permanently. He carried her grocery bags despite her protests and moved with calm awareness that felt oddly disciplined for someone supposedly living on the streets. When a speeding cyclist nearly clipped Rachel crossing an intersection, Sean pulled her back instinctively before she even noticed the danger, his reflexes quick and precise.
"Thanks," she muttered. "You react fast."
"Used to crowded places," he answered casually. Rachel narrowed her eyes but let it go. Her apartment building looked even smaller beside him somehow, its peeling stairwell paint and buzzing hallway lights painfully obvious as she unlocked the door. "Grandma," she called carefully, "I brought someone." The television volume lowered.
Her grandmother emerged from the bedroom wearing thick socks in confusion that instantly transformed into delight when she saw Sean. "Oh heavens," the old woman gasped. "You didn't tell me he was handsome."
Rachel nearly choked while Sean froze visibly for the first time since she had met him.
"Grandma, why is your fiancé dressed like a fisherman?" the old woman interrupted. Sean glanced at Rachel once before smoothly bowing his head. "Economic difficulties," he said gravely.
The old woman slapped Rachel's arm.
"You made the poor boy wait outside in this weather?" "Grandma, it's complicated." "Love is always complicated."
She grabbed Sean's sleeve and practically dragged him inside.
"Sit down. Eat something."
"Rachel barely feeds herself properly, so if you survived her cooking this long, you deserve respect." Rachel stared in disbelief while Sean hid another smile behind his hand.
Dinner became the strangest evening of Rachel's life.
Her grandmother interrogated Sean enthusiastically about imaginary wedding plans while Sean answered with effortless improvisation that somehow sounded both sincere and ridiculous at the same time. "How did you meet my granddaughter?" the old woman asked. Sean chewed slowly before replying, "She offered me fries."
Rachel kicked him under the table.
He did not react outwardly, but one corner of his mouth twitched.
"And you fell in love over potatoes?"
"It happens," Sean said solemnly. The old woman laughed so hard she started coughing. Rachel rushed to steady her while Sean's expression shifted instantly with concern. He handed over the water glass before Rachel asked, eyes studying the old woman carefully.
"Her breathing worsens at night?" he asked quietly.
Rachel looked surprised.
"How did you know?"
"She keeps pressing her ribs when she coughs." His tone remained casual, but Rachel noticed he missed nothing around him. Later, after her grandmother finally fell asleep smiling for the first time in days, Rachel spread blankets across the couch awkwardly.
"Sorry, it's small." Sean glanced around the cramped apartment.
Family photos lined the shelves beside faded furniture repaired countless times. Despite the poverty, the place felt warm in a way luxury apartments rarely did. "I've slept in worse places recently," he said.
Rachel hesitated near the kitchen doorway.
"You never said why you were homeless."
Sean leaned back slowly. "Needed to disappear for a while." "From what?" "People."
The answer carried enough finality that Rachel did not press further.
She nodded once. Bathrooms down the hall.
The hot water only works if you hit the pipe twice.
Useful architecture.
She laughed quietly despite herself. As she turned toward her bedroom, Sean suddenly spoke again.
Rachel.
Yeah?
Thank you.
The sincerity in his voice stopped her. For a second she saw past the beard, the worn clothes, and the guarded detachment into something deeply tired hiding underneath.
Good night, Sean, she said softly.
He watched her bedroom door close before the faint smile vanished from his face entirely. A moment later his expression hardened with cold focus as he pulled a hidden phone from inside his boot.
20 missed calls flashed across the screen. Sean dialed one number.
His assistant answered immediately in near panic.
Thank God.
Sean, the studio is threatening breach of contract lawsuits, reporters are camping outside your penthouse, and your mother publicly claimed you're recovering from exhaustion in Switzerland.
Interesting. Interesting? You just married a stranger. Not legally yet. That's your concern? Sean's gaze drifted toward Rachel's closed bedroom door. Find out everything about Daniel June and Vivian Lynn. Already did. They're attending an engagement gala tomorrow night. Sean's eyes cooled dangerously. Perfect.
The next morning Rachel awoke to the smell of breakfast. She stumbled into the kitchen expecting her grandmother, only to stop short at the sight of Sean cooking eggs with surprising skill while wearing one of her oversized sweaters. His damp hair fell loosely over his forehead now that he had washed properly, and without layers of dirt hiding his features, Rachel realized with abrupt alarm that he was absurdly attractive.
Not ordinary handsome. Distractingly handsome.
The kind of face magazines built careers around.
You can cook, she asked. Sean glanced over casually. People assume homeless men survive on sunlight?
No, I just assumed you survived on gas station noodles.
Fair.
Her grandmother entered moments later and nearly burst into tears from happiness at the domestic scene unfolding in her tiny kitchen.
A man who cooks, she announced dramatically. Rachel, if you lose this one, I'll haunt you after death.
Rachel rolled her eyes while Sean hid amusement behind his coffee cup.
The peaceful moment shattered an hour later when pounding erupted at the apartment door.
Rachel opened it to find Vivian standing there in designer boots and sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Her cousin pushed inside without invitation. So the rumors are true, Vivian said, looking around the apartment with open disdain. You moved on by picking up a homeless guy.
Rachel's jaw tightened. Leave.
Vivian circled Sean slowly like inspecting an animal.
At least Daniel upgraded.
You downgraded all the way to the sidewalk. Sean met her gaze calmly. And yet Rachel still seems happier.
Vivian scoffed. Please. She's pretending because she can't accept reality.
Her attention shifted toward the grandmother watching nervously from the couch. Auntie, did Rachel tell you she
attacked me? Rachel stepped forward instantly. Don't involve Grandma. Why not?
She should know her granddaughter ruined an entire wedding because she couldn't control her temper. Rachel's hands curled into fists, but before she could respond, Sean spoke quietly. You wore her bridal veil while sleeping with her fiancé.
Vivian blinked. Excuse me? I'm saying you probably shouldn't discuss dignity. Silence slammed through the room.
Vivian stared at him in disbelief, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged.
Rachel almost smiled.
Vivian recovered quickly, crossing her arms.
You think you matter because Rachel dragged you in from the cold? Sean leaned back against the counter lazily. No. I think you matter less than you believe. Vivian's face reddened.
She turned sharply toward Rachel.
You always did collect pathetic things. Rachel expected Sean to stay silent after that.
Instead he stepped forward with sudden quiet intensity that made even Vivian instinctively retreat half a step. Listen carefully, he said. Rachel showed kindness to someone she believed had absolutely nothing to offer her.
That makes her better than most people in this city, including you.
Vivian opened her mouth, but Sean continued before she could speak. Now leave before your insecurity embarrasses you further. Vivian stared at him with pure fury before grabbing her purse violently. You deserve each other, she spat at Rachel.
Enjoy your charity case, husband.
The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the walls.
Rachel released a long breath she had been holding.
Her grandmother looked deeply confused.
Why did she call him homeless? Rachel and Sean exchanged a glance.
Method acting, Sean answered immediately. The old woman nodded slowly as if that somehow explained everything. Once she returned to her room, Rachel burst into helpless laughter against the kitchen counter.
Sean looked mildly offended. What's funny?
Method acting, she wheezed.
That was your emergency lie? I panicked. You looked perfectly calm. Internally, it was chaos. Rachel laughed harder. Sean watched her for a moment, surprised by how different she looked when genuinely amused instead of burdened by worry.
Something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly.
He looked away first.
That afternoon Rachel convinced Sean to accompany her to a small civil office to file temporary marriage paperwork for her grandmother's peace of mind.
Sean signed the documents with smooth confidence while Rachel fumbled nervously through forms.
You don't seem scared at all, she whispered.
Should I be? Most people hesitate before marrying a near stranger.
Sean studied her briefly.
You fed me before you knew anything about me. That tells me enough.
The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than any dramatic declaration could have.
Afterward they stepped outside into weak winter sunlight only to find paparazzi cameras suddenly exploding from across the street. Sean's entire body went rigid.
Rachel flinched at the flashes.
Who are they? She asked in alarm.
Sean grabbed her wrist instantly.
Move.
His voice had changed completely, sharp, commanding, urgent. Before Rachel could react properly, Sean pulled her through the crowded sidewalk with astonishing speed.
Reporters shouted questions from behind them. Sean. Sean, is it true you vanished after assault allegations against director Kwan? Who is the woman beside you?
Rachel stumbled slightly.
Wait, Sean?
He shoved them both into a narrow alley just before cameras rounded the corner. His breathing remained controlled, but his eyes burned with irritation. Rachel stared at him in shock.
Why did they call you Sean? A long silence followed.
Somewhere nearby reporters continued shouting.
Finally Sean removed the beanie from his head slowly.
Without the beard hiding half his face, recognition hit Rachel all at once so hard she physically
stepped backward. She had seen this face on movie posters, giant billboards, magazine covers, television interviews playing above electronics stores. Sean Shaw. International film star. Award-winning actor.
One of the most recognizable celebrities in Asia.
Rachel's mind completely blanked.
You, she whispered stupidly.
You're him. Sean watched her carefully, almost warily now. Yes. Rachel looked ready to faint.
I proposed marriage to Sean Shaw beside a subway station.
Technically, yes.
I gave Sean Shaw leftover fries.
They were good fries.
She pressed both hands against her forehead.
Oh my God. Footsteps approached rapidly outside the alley.
Sean instantly pulled Rachel deeper behind a delivery truck just as reporters rushed past the entrance. Rachel found herself trapped against his chest, heart hammering violently. Sean's arm remained around her waist to steady her, his face inches from hers now that the disguise no longer concealed him. Up close he looked even more unreal, but his eyes carried genuine exhaustion rather than celebrity perfection.
Rachel stared at him in complete disbelief. You lied. To me. Sean's expression tightened slightly. I hid. There's a difference. You're literally famous worldwide. That wasn't useful information at the subway station. Despite the chaos, Rachel suddenly barked out a disbelieving laugh. Sean looked startled. You think this is funny?
No, she gasped, half hysterical.
I think my life has become insane. For the first time since revealing himself, Sean smiled faintly. Then his phone vibrated. He answered immediately. His assistant's panicked voice echoed loudly enough for Rachel to hear.
Sean, every entertainment site in the country just published photos of you holding hands with an unknown woman outside the marriage office.
Your mother is threatening legal action against somebody. Also, Daniel June's family just discovered who Rachel is.
Sean's eyes darkened slowly.
Good, he said.
Rachel spent the next 10 minutes convinced she was standing inside a hallucination created by sleep deprivation, because every time she looked at Sean's face another memory clicked violently into place: giant luxury advertisements hanging above shopping malls, interviews playing silently on restaurant televisions, coworkers gossiping about his latest film, entire crowds screaming his name outside cinemas. She remembered once joking that Sean Shaw probably had never eaten instant noodles in his life, and now the man who had quietly fixed her leaking sink the previous evening stood beside her in a freezing alley while paparazzi hunted them through downtown traffic.
Say something, Sean said at last after ending the call.
Rachel blinked rapidly.
You won 3 international acting awards. That's what you choose to focus on?
You own a penthouse overlooking the river.
Technically several. Rachel pointed at him accusingly. You slept on cardboard beside a pharmacy. Sean leaned against the wall calmly. Temporary lifestyle adjustment.
That is not a normal sentence. Despite the absurdity, her panic began mixing with reluctant amusement because Sean himself seemed strangely unchanged beneath the fame. The same dry humor remained. The same tired eyes. The same habit of studying people carefully before speaking. Sean watched her expression shift and exhaled subtly, tension leaving his shoulders for the first time since revealing himself.
You're not angry?
Rachel folded her arms tightly.
I haven't decided yet. Reasonable. Did you ever plan to tell me? Sean considered the question honestly. Eventually. After the wedding or before? Probably before the honeymoon.
Rachel stared at him in disbelief before another laugh escaped her. Sean shook his head slightly. Most people scream when they discover they accidentally married a celebrity.
Most people don't accidentally marry celebrities. A black luxury sedan rolled silently into the alley entrance moments later.
The driver hurried out and opened the rear door while avoiding eye contact with Rachel completely. Sean gestured toward the car.
We should leave before reporters circle back. Rachel hesitated. I should go home. Grandma will be safer if reporters don't know your address yet.
The seriousness in his voice erased her objections. She climbed into the car slowly, still trying to process reality while Sean sat beside her scrolling through endless headlines on his phone. Rachel caught glimpses of phrases flashing across the screen. Runaway film emperor spotted with secret bride and mystery woman captures Sean Shaw's heart.
This is bad, isn't it? She asked quietly. Sean looked out the window. For some people.
The sedan drove across the city toward the financial district where mirrored towers rose into gray winter skies. Rachel expected them to stop outside a luxury hotel. Instead, the car entered a private underground garage beneath an enormous riverside building guarded by security checkpoints. Sean led her toward a private elevator while staff members froze in
stunned disbelief at his sudden appearance. One young receptionist nearly dropped an entire stack of folders.
Mr. Shaw, she stammered. Everyone's been your mother later, Sean said gently before guiding Rachel into the elevator.
As the doors closed, Rachel finally asked the question haunting her since the alley. Why were you hiding? Sean remained silent until the elevator opened directly into a massive penthouse wrapped in glass walls and city light.
Rachel stepped inside slowly, overwhelmed by polished stone floors, towering bookshelves, and panoramic river views stretching endlessly beyond the windows. The place looked less like an apartment and more like the private floor of a museum. Yet despite the luxury, something about it felt cold and untouched.
No personal photographs. No clutter. No warmth.
Sean removed his coat quietly. 3 months ago, he began, a young actress named Mina Choi died.
Rachel recognized the name instantly. The scandal online? Sean nodded once.
The media claimed she committed suicide because of cyberbullying.
That wasn't entirely true.
He walked toward the windows, voice growing distant.
Nina was my co-star.
She was 23, talented, terrified of disappointing people, and surrounded by executives who treated her like a product instead of a human being.
Rachel listened silently.
One night after filming, she came to me crying because a director threatened to blacklist her unless she slept with him.
Sean's jaw tightened visibly. I told her I'd handle it. I thought I had time.
The city lights reflected sharply in his eyes now.
3 days later she overdosed. Rachel's chest ached unexpectedly at the emptiness in his tone.
I exposed the director publicly after her death.
Studios turned against me overnight because he had investors protecting him. Reporters started digging into every aspect of my life. People I trusted sold private information. My ex-girlfriend gave interviews claiming I became unstable. He laughed once without humor. Apparently grief damages market value.
Rachel moved closer slowly.
So you disappeared. I wanted silence.
His gaze drifted toward her.
Then a fast food worker handed me gloves during a snowstorm without asking for anything.
Rachel looked down awkwardly.
They were cheap gloves.
They were clean. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than dramatic emotion would have.
For a moment neither spoke.
Then the penthouse doors burst open violently. A tall, elegant woman in a charcoal coat stormed inside surrounded by assistants. Rachel recognized her immediately from business magazines, Evelyn Shaw, chairwoman of the Shaw Entertainment Group and Sean's mother. Her sharp eyes locked onto Rachel first with icy calculation before turning toward her son. You vanished for weeks, Evelyn said coldly.
Then reappear married to a cashier? Rachel stiffened instantly. Sean stepped slightly in front of her. Temporary contract.
Evelyn's gaze sharpened. You brought a stranger into this family during an active media crisis. I'm not joining your family, Rachel said before she could stop herself.
Evelyn finally looked directly at her. Then perhaps you're smarter than you appear. Sean's expression cooled dangerously. Enough.
The assistants exchanged nervous glances.
Evelyn ignored him. Do you have any idea what damage this causes? Investors already question Sean's judgment after the Kwan scandal. Rachel frowned slightly. The director Sean exposed? A naive mistake, Evelyn replied dismissively. Public morality doesn't sustain billion-dollar companies. Silence crashed through the room. Rachel stared at the woman in disbelief. A girl died. And emotional decisions won't bring her back. Sean's voice cut through the tension like ice. Leave.
Evelyn turned toward her son sharply.
You disappeared because you couldn't handle pressure. Now you're playing house. With a waitress. Leave, Sean repeated.
This time the command carried enough force that even Rachel felt it physically. Evelyn studied him for several long seconds before smoothing her coat calmly. The board arranged a press conference tomorrow morning.
You will attend. No, this isn't negotiable. Sean stepped closer slowly. You built a company around my face.
Don't mistake that for ownership.
For the first time uncertainty flickered across Evelyn's expression.
She glanced once more at Rachel, clearly judging whether she represented weakness or danger, before finally leaving without another word.
The penthouse fell silent.
Rachel released a breath carefully.
Your family is terrifying.
Sean rubbed his forehead tiredly. You handled that better than most executives. I almost threw a vase at her. That's actually how several board meetings end. Rachel laughed despite the tension. Sean watched her quietly again, visibly calmer around her in a way he himself seemed not to understand. Before either could speak further, another call interrupted. Sean answered while walking toward the study, but Rachel overheard enough to freeze completely.
What do you mean Daniel scheduled a press interview? Sean's voice darkened instantly. Find the location. Rachel moved closer anxiously. What happened?
Sean lowered the phone slowly. Your ex-fiancé just announced publicly that you manipulated him for money and became obsessed after he ended the engagement. Rachel stared at him blankly.
What?
Sean turned the screen toward her. Live footage showed Daniel standing outside the luxury hotel beside Vivian while reporters crowded around microphones.
Daniel wore a carefully wounded expression Rachel now recognized as completely fake.
Rachel struggled emotionally after realizing our relationship couldn't continue, he told reporters solemnly. I tried to help her privately, but unfortunately she became unstable. Vivian squeezed his arm supportively for the cameras. Rachel felt physically sick.
They're lying. Sean studied her trembling hands before asking quietly, do you trust me?
Rachel looked up immediately.
Yes. The answer came too fast to be logical, yet it was true. Sean nodded once. Then get your coat.
40 minutes later Rachel sat inside another black vehicle speeding toward the televised interview venue while Sean calmly adjusted the cufflinks on a dark tailored suit someone had delivered to the car mid-route. The transformation from homeless wanderer to international superstar happened so completely it almost frightened her. His posture sharpened. His gaze hardened. Even the silence around him felt powerful now.
You've done this before, Rachel murmured. Sean glanced sideways. Destroyed people publicly? Exactly. Only when they deserved it.
The car stopped outside the hotel where reporters swarmed beneath bright lights. Security guards instantly cleared paths the moment Sean stepped out.
The reaction was explosive. Shouts erupted everywhere. Cameras flashed blindingly. Rachel instinctively froze until Sean offered his hand without looking back. Stay beside me. She took it immediately.
Inside the ballroom Daniel stood mid-interview when the crowd suddenly shifted violently toward the entrance.
Confusion crossed his face before color drained completely from it.
Vivian nearly dropped her champagne glass.
Sean Shaw walked into the room holding Rachel's hand like royalty entering a battlefield. Every camera pivoted instantly. Reporters shouted over one another. Sean! Are the marriage rumors true? Mr. Shaw, what is your relationship with Rachel Lynn? Sean ignored them all until he reached the stage directly before Daniel. The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel attempted a nervous smile. Mr. Shaw, what an unexpected surprise. Sean regarded him with cool indifference. You accused my wife of manipulation.
Rachel's breath caught at the word wife despite knowing
their marriage was technically fake. Daniel forced a laugh. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. No, Sean interrupted calmly. I understand perfectly.
He removed a folder from his assistant's hand and dropped it onto the table before Daniel.
Hotel tax fraud investigations. Bribery records.
Employee harassment settlements your family buried over the last 4 years.
Daniel's face emptied entirely. Reporters surged forward instantly.
Vivian grabbed his arm in panic. Sean's voice remained smooth and controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying. You publicly humiliated a woman who spent years supporting you while you cheated on her repeatedly.
He looked directly into Daniel's eyes now. That was your first mistake.
The ballroom had become completely silent except for frantic camera shutters.
Sean turned slightly toward Vivian next. Sleeping with your cousin's fiancé for social status was your second. Vivian looked ready to collapse.
Rachel stood frozen beside Sean, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the moment unfolding around her.
Sean finally faced the reporters. Rachel Lynn is under my protection from this moment forward. Every word landed with absolute clarity.
Anyone spreading false statements about her will answer to my legal team personally.
Daniel attempted one final desperate protest. You can't ruin us over a private relationship issue.
Sean looked at him almost curiously.
No, he said softly. You ruined yourselves. I'm simply removing the curtain so everyone can watch. Then he turned. away while the ballroom erupted into absolute chaos behind them.
Reporters attacked Daniel with questions.
Vivian began crying publicly.
Security rushed forward. Through all the noise, Rachel remained speechless as Sean guided her calmly toward the exit. Once they reached the quieter hallway outside, she finally found her voice.
"You just destroyed their lives."
Sean adjusted his coat slightly. "They started with yours." Rachel stared at him while flashes from the ballroom still exploded behind the doors. For the first time since discovering Daniel's betrayal, she no longer felt powerless. And for the first time since disappearing from public life, Sean Shaw looked fully awake again. The ride back to the penthouse felt unreal in a completely different way from before because now Rachel understood the scale of what Sean had done. Within less than an hour he had turned a carefully staged public humiliation against Daniel and Vivian so completely that every major entertainment and business outlet in the country would spend the next morning dissecting the scandal. Yet Sean himself sat beside her in silence, scrolling through financial reports as though he had merely handled routine paperwork. Rachel finally broke the quiet.
"Were those documents real?" Sean glanced up briefly. "Unfortunately for Daniel, yes." "You already investigated him before tonight?" "I investigate everyone around me."
Rachel stared at him.
"That's terrifying." "It's survival."
The answer carried no pride, only exhaustion. Outside the car windows the city glowed beneath fresh snowfall while Rachel replayed the ballroom scene repeatedly in her mind. The look on Daniel's face when Sean called her his wife.
Vivian's panic. The reporters turning like sharks scenting blood.
For days Rachel had felt humiliated and discarded, reduced to gossip for people wealthier and louder than her. Tonight, for the first time, someone had stood beside her without hesitation. She looked toward Sean again.
"Why did you really do it?"
Sean rested his head briefly against the seat. "Because people like Daniel assume kindness means weakness."
"That can't be the only reason."
His eyes shifted toward her slowly.
"No," he admitted.
Heat crept unexpectedly into Rachel's face, and she quickly turned toward the window before he noticed. The moment shattered when Sean's phone exploded with calls again.
He answered one impatiently. "What now?"
His assistant sounded near death from stress.
"Your mother just threatened to remove you from the board entirely.
Also, your fan clubs are currently dividing into factions over whether Rachel is a gold digger or a national hero."
Rachel nearly choked.
Sean closed his eyes briefly.
"Anything else?"
"Yes.
Someone leaked your marriage registration online." Silence. Then Sean sighed. "Fine. Prepare the press conference tomorrow." Rachel looked alarmed. "Press conference? If we stay silent, they'll invent worse stories. I've never even spoken in front of 20 people." "Good. Reporters are less dangerous than studio executives." "That does not comfort me." Sean actually smiled faintly. "It shouldn't."
Back at the penthouse, Rachel wandered restlessly through the enormous living room while Sean disappeared into a study with several assistants who had arrived carrying laptops and stacks of documents. Through the partly open doors she caught fragments of intense conversations.
"No, cancel the endorsement deal.
Tell legal to sue immediately. I don't care what the board thinks." The entire atmosphere around Sean had changed now that he was back inside his world. Staff members moved quickly around him with visible tension while he handled crisis after crisis without raising his voice once. Rachel suddenly felt painfully out of place standing there in discount jeans inside a billionaire's penthouse while famous people's careers shifted around her like chess pieces. She quietly slipped toward the balcony for air.
Snowflakes
drifted across the river below while distant traffic hummed through the night.
"Planning an escape?" Sean asked behind her.
Rachel jumped slightly. He had changed into a black sweater now, looking less like a celebrity and more like the man she had met beneath the pharmacy light, though no disguise could truly hide him anymore. "Just thinking," she admitted. Sean leaned beside her against the railing.
"Dangerous hobby."
Rachel smiled weakly before the smile faded. "Your world is huge."
"Mostly loud." Still huge. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. I don't belong in it. Sean looked toward the skyline for several seconds before answering. Neither do I most days. Rachel frowned slightly. That's impossible. Everyone knows you. They know the version of me sold to them. His voice remained calm, but bitterness lingered underneath now. The charming actor. The perfect celebrity son. The reliable investment. He glanced sideways at her. You're one of the few people who spoke to me before knowing any of that. Rachel laughed softly. That's because I thought you were homeless. Exactly. Silence settled comfortably between them until Rachel finally asked the question lingering in her mind since the alley. Why did your ex-girlfriend say you became unstable? Sean's expression cooled faintly. Because I stopped giving her what she wanted. Money? Attention. He folded his arms loosely. Lena loved being photographed beside me more than being with me. When Mina died and I stopped attending parties, she started leaking stories to reporters about my mental state. Rachel winced. That's awful. Sean shrugged once. Fame attracts people who confuse access with affection. The sentence lingered heavily between them. Rachel looked down at the snowy streets far below. You really trusted nobody before this, huh? Sean answered honestly. No, then why trust me? He studied her quietly, and for a second Rachel forgot how to breathe because his gaze held no performance now, no polished celebrity charm, only direct sincerity that felt strangely intimate. Because when you thought I had nothing, he said softly, you still treated me like I mattered. Rachel's heartbeat stumbled hard enough to annoy her. She turned away quickly before he noticed. Unfortunately, Sean noticed everything. He smiled slightly but spared her further embarrassment by changing the subject. Tomorrow will be ugly. The press conference? My mother will try controlling the narrative. The board will push me to deny the marriage entirely. Rachel stiffened immediately. If that's easier for you, I understand. Sean's expression sharpened. I didn't say I'd allow it. The firmness in his tone surprised her. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted from inside. Mr. Shaw? A young assistant approached nervously holding a tablet. Your mother arranged an emergency board vote for 9 a.m. Sean took the tablet silently. Rachel watched his eyes darken while reading. They're trying to suspend my executive authority, he said flatly. Can they do that? They can try. The assistant hesitated before adding, there's another issue. Sean looked up impatiently. What? Someone leaked Ms. Lynn's employment records online. Her manager at the restaurant just received dozens of calls from reporters. Rachel felt her stomach drop instantly. My coworkers, we've already sent security there, the assistant said quickly. Sean's jaw tightened visibly. Enough. The quiet anger in his voice made the assistant retreat immediately. Rachel suddenly felt guilty. This is becoming a disaster because of me. Sean turned toward her sharply. No. This became a disaster because predators realized they could use you to reach me. Same difference. Not even close. Rachel looked away. I'm serious, Sean. Your company's attacking you. Reporters are invading my workplace. Your mother probably wants me buried alive somewhere. That last part is accurate. Despite herself, Rachel laughed weakly. Sean stepped closer now, lowering his voice. Listen carefully. None of this is your fault. She met his gaze reluctantly. You barely know me. I know enough. Something warm and dangerous flickered between them before both were interrupted again by loud voices echoing from the penthouse entrance. Seconds later the doors burst open and a glamorous woman in a fur-lined coat stormed inside, surrounded by photographers somehow reckless enough to follow her. Rachel recognized her immediately from entertainment headlines. Lena Vale. International supermodel. Sean's ex-girlfriend.
There you are, Lena announced dramatically while cameras flashed wildly behind her.
The missing emperor returns home with a replacement bride. Sean's entire expression hardened into cold stone.
Get the photographers out.
Relax.
The public loves emotional reunions.
Lena's gaze landed on Rachel with open amusement. Oh. You're even poorer looking in person. Rachel's patience snapped instantly.
And you're ruder than television. One photographer accidentally laughed before silencing himself. Lena removed her sunglasses slowly.
Cute. Sean stepped between them. Leave. Not until you explain why I spent 2 years defending your career only to be humiliated publicly by your little marriage stunt. Sean looked genuinely unimpressed. You sold private information about me to tabloids during Mina's funeral. Lena's smile flickered. Business is business. Exactly.
Which means this conversation is over. He signaled security sharply. Guards immediately began escorting the protesting photographers away while Lena remained glaring furiously at Rachel.
Do you really think he'll stay interested once the scandal fades? She asked coldly. Sean gets bored easily.
Rachel expected Sean to ignore the insult. Instead, he answered before she could. Interesting, he said calmly. I remember ending our relationship because you spent more time checking camera angles than asking whether I'd eaten.
Lena's face froze.
Rachel nearly inhaled her own tongue trying not to laugh.
Sean continued mercilessly.
Also, for future reference, selling fake mental health stories about your ex-boyfriend usually damages reconciliation attempts. Lena stared at him in pure disbelief.
You're defending her? Sean's expression never changed. I'm correcting you.
The silence that followed crackled with humiliation. Then Lena's gaze shifted toward Rachel again, but this time the hostility carried something sharper beneath it, jealousy. She stepped closer slowly. Be careful, she said quietly.
This industry destroys normal people.
Rachel surprised herself by answering steadily.
Good thing I'm already having a terrible week.
Sean actually laughed out loud at that, brief and genuine.
Lena looked even more offended by his amusement than by the insult itself.
Without another word, she turned sharply and left. The penthouse finally quieted again after security cleared the remaining photographers.
Rachel sank onto the couch heavily. Do famous people always enter rooms like hurricanes?
Sean loosened his collar tiredly.
Only the emotionally unstable ones.
So, all of them?
Fair point.
Rachel watched him move through the room, speaking briefly with assistants, handling calls, resolving crises one after another with relentless composure. Yet beneath it all she noticed the fatigue returning around his eyes.
The loneliness too.
Fame surrounded him constantly, but none of the people orbiting his life seemed to actually care whether he was exhausted, grieving, or overwhelmed.
They cared about headlines, contracts, appearances, profit.
Rachel suddenly remembered him sitting alone beneath falling snow outside the subway station and understood something. Painful all at once, disappearing had probably felt peaceful compared to this. Later that night, after the staff finally left, Rachel found Sean alone in the kitchen staring at nothing while holding untouched whiskey. You okay? She asked softly.
He looked up slowly. Not particularly. Rachel walked over and took the glass gently from his hand before replacing it with tea. Sean raised an eyebrow. That bad?
You look like you're trying to argue with ghosts. For a moment he simply watched steam rise from the cup.
Mina used to drink this tea during night shoots, he admitted quietly.
Said it helped her sleep. Rachel leaned against the counter beside him.
Do you blame yourself? Sean gave a faint humorless smile. Every day.
Rachel considered him carefully before speaking. My grandmother says guilt is selfish after a while.
He glanced sideways. That's a harsh philosophy.
She means eventually the dead stop hearing apologies, but the living still need you.
Sean fell silent.
Rachel continued gently, you exposed the director who hurt her.
That matters. Not enough. Maybe not to you.
She shrugged slightly. But maybe another scared actress saw what you did and realized powerful men aren't untouchable.
Sean looked at her fully now.
The tension in his expression softened little by little.
You always talk to homeless strangers like this?
Only the famous emotionally damaged ones.
A quiet laugh escaped him.
Then, unexpectedly, he reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face with careful fingers. The movement was so natural neither reacted immediately.
Rachel's breath caught first. Sean's hand stilled slightly against her cheek.
The kitchen suddenly felt far too quiet.
Far too close. Their eyes locked.
Rachel became acutely aware of every detail, the warmth of his fingertips, the faint scent of cedar on his sweater, the exhaustion and tenderness mixed strangely together in his gaze. Sean lowered his hand slowly but did not step away. This contract marriage, he said softly, is becoming complicated.
Rachel swallowed hard. Yeah. Neither moved. And just as the distance between them began disappearing inch by inch, Sean's phone rang loudly across the counter, shattering the moment completely.
He closed his eyes once in visible frustration before answering. His assistant's panicked voice erupted immediately. Sean, your grandmother-in-law just announced to her entire neighborhood that you're hosting an engagement dinner tomorrow night. Rachel groaned aloud and covered her face while Sean stared at the ceiling for several long seconds before finally muttering, "Of course she did." By 8 the next morning, Rachel understood exactly how dangerous elderly women with wedding excitement could become because her grandmother had somehow transformed a simple neighborhood dinner into a full engagement celebration involving relatives, church friends, former co-workers, and at least 3 women Rachel had not seen since middle school.
Why are there floral centerpieces? Rachel demanded over the phone while standing inside Sean's penthouse kitchen wearing borrowed sweatpants in complete despair.
Her grandmother sounded delighted.
Mrs. Han's son owns an event company. Grandma, this was supposed to be soup and noodles. Noodles don't celebrate love properly.
Rachel pinched the bridge of her nose. Across the kitchen, Sean sat reading financial reports while drinking coffee with the unnerving calm of someone reviewing weather forecasts instead of corporate warfare.
How bad? He asked once Rachel hung up. There's a violinist. Sean lowered the newspaper slowly. A what? Apparently Mrs. Han's nephew attends music school. Sean considered this information with admirable seriousness.
Your grandmother operates like a military strategist.
You have no idea.
His phone buzzed again with board updates while assistants rushed through the penthouse carrying garment bags and legal documents.
Rachel watched the chaos uneasily. You should focus on your company problems instead of fake engagement dinners. Sean signed a paper without looking up. I can multitask.
Your mother's trying to remove you from power.
She's tried before. Rachel blinked. Before? Sean leaned back slightly.
When I refused to sign a contract forcing Mina into another film after she collapsed from exhaustion during production. Something cold passed briefly through his expression. My mother values profit margins over oxygen. Rachel stared at him carefully.
Did you always fight with her?
No, his voice quieted unexpectedly. When my father was alive, she was different.
Rachel had never heard Sean mention his father before. What happened? Car accident when I was 17. Sean folded the newspaper slowly. After that, the company became everything to her.
Eventually I stopped being her son and became an investment portfolio with a face. The bluntness of the sentence unsettled Rachel more than anger would have. Before she could respond, another assistant approached nervously.
Mr. Shaw, the board members have arrived downstairs.
Sean stood smoothly, instantly becoming colder somehow, more distant and controlled.
Stay here until I finish. Rachel crossed her arms. I'm not a hostage.
No, he agreed quietly.
You're the only peaceful thing in this building.
The words hit her unexpectedly hard before he disappeared toward the private elevator surrounded by assistants. Alone in the giant penthouse, Rachel wandered restlessly until she noticed a piano near the windows partly hidden behind shelves. Dust lightly coated the keys as if nobody had touched it in years. Curious, she pressed one note softly.
He used to play every night. Rachel jumped. An older housekeeper stood nearby carrying folded laundry.
Sorry, Rachel said quickly. The woman smiled kindly.
You must be Rachel. Is everyone in this building already talking about me? Mostly because Mr. Shaw smiled yesterday. Rachel frowned. That's unusual?
The housekeeper laughed quietly. After Miss Mina died, this apartment became silent. She glanced toward the piano sadly.
He stopped sleeping properly too. Rachel looked again at the untouched instrument. Did they know each other long? Mina? The woman nodded while arranging towels.
She reminded him of himself before fame made everything heavy. Rachel absorbed that quietly.
Were they in love?
The housekeeper paused thoughtfully.
No.
But they trusted each other. For someone like Mr. Shaw, trust is rarer. Before Rachel could ask more, raised voices echoed faintly through the penthouse intercom system connected to the boardroom downstairs.
A woman's sharp tone cut through first Evelyn Shaw. You've become reckless. Sean's reply came calm and controlled. I exposed a predator. You endangered company partnerships. Interesting priorities.
Rachel moved closer involuntarily.
Another male voice spoke anxiously. Sean, public sympathy won't save the stock price if investors panic. Then perhaps investors should develop moral standards. Morality doesn't run corporations. Sean answered instantly. Neither does fear. Yet all of you seem terrified. Rachel could practically hear the tension thickening downstairs. Evelyn spoke again, colder now. This girl is clouding your judgment. Silence followed. Then Sean's voice arrived sharp enough to freeze the air.
Mention Rachel disrespectfully again and this meeting ends immediately. Rachel's heart stumbled awkwardly. The boardroom erupted into overlapping arguments after that, but she stopped listening, unsettled by how fiercely Sean defended her even under attack. An hour later he returned looking immaculate in a charcoal suit and emotionally exhausted beneath it. Rachel handed him coffee without speaking.
Sean accepted it with visible gratitude. How bad? She asked. I still own enough shares to block removal attempts.
He loosened his tie slightly. Unfortunately, my mother inherited persistence genetically incompatible with peace.
Rachel hesitated. You defended me.
Sean looked mildly confused.
Obviously. Why obviously?
He studied her for a second before answering carefully.
Because nobody gets to use you as a weapon against me.
The sincerity in his voice made Rachel look away quickly again. She was developing a dangerous habit of blushing around him. Before either could say more, her phone exploded with notifications. Messages flooded endlessly from unknown numbers, former classmates, co-workers, reporters, even distant relatives suddenly remembering her existence.
One headline dominated every screen: Sean Shaw to host private engagement dinner for mystery bride.
Rachel nearly fainted.
Grandma leaked the location.
Sean closed his eyes slowly. Of course she did. 3 hours later Rachel stood inside the penthouse bedroom surrounded by stylists sent by Sean's team while trying unsuccessfully not to panic. Dresses covered every surface.
Makeup artists hovered nearby. Someone was steaming fabric with terrifying intensity. I can wear my own clothes, Rachel protested weakly.
Mr. Shaw requested elegance, one stylist replied diplomatically. Mr. Shaw can request less expensive elegance.
The stylist ignored this entirely and held
up a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than Rachel's yearly salary.
Meanwhile, across the hall, Sean endured his own chaos while assistants briefed him on security threats, press containment, and legal fallout from Daniel's scandal.
The June family is attempting private settlements, an attorney explained.
Too late, Sean replied. Continue the investigations. Another assistant looked nervous.
Your mother invited several board members tonight without permission.
Sean's expression cooled. Then tonight should be educational for them.
By evening, the penthouse transformed into a glowing spectacle of flowers, candlelight, musicians, and wealthy guests pretending not to stare openly at Rachel when she entered beside Sean. Conversations visibly paused throughout the room. Rachel nearly turned around immediately until Sean quietly offered his arm.
Breathe. Easy for you to say. No, he murmured.
I spent years learning how to survive rooms like this. She looked at him then, truly looked, and realized the calm sophistication people admired in celebrities was often just practiced armor.
Rachel slipped her arm through his anyway. The effect on the crowd was immediate. Whispers spread rapidly. Cameras flashed discreetly despite security restrictions.
Rachel recognized actors, politicians, fashion executives, and business tycoons from television. Most smiled politely while assessing her like an unexpected stock market disruption.
I hate all of them already, Rachel whispered under her breath. Sean's mouth twitched slightly. That's actually refreshing.
Her grandmother arrived moments later wearing enough happiness to light the entire building alone. Look at my beautiful granddaughter, she cried dramatically before hugging Sean like he genuinely belonged to the family already.
And my handsome grandson.
Sean, international superstar and feared corporate figure, allowed the tiny old woman to pinch his cheek without resistance.
Several guests looked physically confused by this development. Dinner began surprisingly peacefully.
Rachel slowly relaxed while neighborhood aunties interrogated Sean about fictional wedding plans and forced him to taste homemade dumplings. To Rachel's growing amusement, Sean handled ordinary elderly women more nervously than corporate executives. Eat more, Mrs. Hahn commanded while filling his plate aggressively.
You're too skinny for such expensive suits. Sean obeyed with the solemnity of a hostage negotiating survival. Rachel nearly laughed herself unconscious.
The warmth around the table felt genuine in a way the glamorous guests clearly did not understand.
For a little while Sean seemed different too, less guarded, less isolated.
He listened to old stories politely.
Helped Rachel's grandmother refill tea.
Even smiled openly several times.
Then Evelyn Shaw arrived. Silence spread through the room almost immediately.
She wore silver silk and composure sharp enough to cut glass.
Several executives followed behind her alongside reporters discreetly pretending to be guests. Rachel instantly sensed trouble. Evelyn approached the table calmly.
What a charming gathering. Her gaze swept across the modest neighborhood guests with faintly concealed judgment. Rachel's grandmother rose politely. You must be Sean's mother.
Unfortunately. Sean's expression hardened at once. You weren't invited. Evelyn ignored him entirely.
I simply wanted to meet the woman who captured my son's attention during a billion-dollar scandal.
Rachel straightened slowly. I didn't capture anyone. Really? Evelyn glanced toward Sean coolly.
Then perhaps explain why my son destroyed business alliances over a waitress he met beside a subway station. The room became painfully quiet. Rachel felt humiliation rising hot beneath her skin, but before she could answer, her grandmother spoke first. Young lady, the old woman said sharply, money may buy diamonds, but it clearly failed to
buy you manners. Several neighborhood aunties nodded immediately in support.
Evelyn blinked, visibly unprepared to be scolded by a 78-year-old woman holding dumplings. Rachel almost admired her grandmother enough to cry.
Sean hid a smile behind his wineglass. Evelyn recovered quickly. You misunderstand.
I'm merely concerned about opportunists exploiting my son's vulnerable state.
Rachel finally answered then, voice steady despite the sting.
If I wanted money, I would have stayed with Daniel.
A few nearby guests coughed awkwardly. Sean's gaze shifted toward her with unmistakable approval.
Evelyn folded her hands elegantly.
And yet here you are living in Sean's penthouse. Rachel took a breath, but Sean spoke first. She's there because I asked her to stay.
His tone carried enough quiet force that nearby conversations stopped entirely again. Evelyn turned toward him slowly.
You're embarrassing yourself. No, Sean replied calmly.
I spent years embarrassing myself by staying silent around people like you.
The tension thickened instantly. Rachel could practically feel guests wishing they were anywhere else.
Evelyn's eyes sharpened dangerously.
You're emotional. I'm honest. This girl is temporary. Your career is permanent.
Sean looked at his mother for a long moment before answering in a voice so quiet the room leaned in to hear it.
Do you know what the strangest part is? Evelyn said nothing.
Rachel believed I was homeless, Sean continued. She still treated me better than most people in this room ever have. Silence crashed down completely.
No music. No conversation. Even the violinist stopped moving. Sean's gaze swept across the wealthy guests now. Some of you have known me for 15 years.
Yet the first person who asked whether I'd eaten recently was a woman working double shifts at a burger shop. Rachel felt her chest tighten painfully. Sean turned back toward his mother. So if you're wondering why she matters to me, that's why.
Nobody spoke.
Evelyn's expression remained controlled, but something uncertain flickered behind her eyes for the first time all evening. Rachel stared at Sean in complete silence because nothing about his voice had sounded fake or contractual anymore.
Not even slightly.
And judging from the way he looked at her afterward, Sean himself had just realized it too. The silence after Sean's words stretched so long that Rachel could hear the faint crackle of candle flames along the dining tables.
Nobody moved. Wealthy executives stared down at their wineglasses, pretending sudden fascination with table settings, while neighborhood aunties looked openly triumphant.
Evelyn Shaw remained perfectly still at the center of the room, but the calm elegance she wore like armor had developed its first visible fracture. "You're confusing gratitude with attachment," she said finally, though her voice lacked some of its earlier certainty. Sean met her gaze without blinking.
No. I spent years confusing manipulation with affection. This feels different.
Rachel's breath caught sharply. Several nearby guests exchanged stunned looks. Evelyn studied her son as though seeing a stranger standing where she expected obedience.
You're willing to jeopardize everything you built over a temporary emotional reaction?
Everything I built nearly destroyed me.
Sean's answer came instantly. So maybe your definition of success needs adjustment. Rachel noticed something subtle then. Sean no longer sounded angry.
He sounded tired. Deeply tired of performing the same battle over and over. Evelyn seemed to recognize it too because her expression shifted almost imperceptibly before hardening again.
You inherited your father's weakness for sentiment.
The sentence hit harder than shouting would have. Sean's jaw tightened once, barely visible. Rachel suddenly understood this argument had existed in different forms for years, perhaps since Sean's father died. Before Sean could answer, Rachel's grandmother stood up abruptly with the terrifying confidence of an elderly woman who no longer feared social consequences.
Enough, she declared.
Nobody insults dead husbands or living grandchildren at my engagement dinner. Mrs. Hahn immediately supported her with aggressive nodding.
Exactly. Another auntie pointed chopsticks toward Evelyn.
You're very pretty, but your personality is exhausting. Somewhere behind them a young violinist accidentally snorted, trying not to laugh. Sean pressed his lips together, visibly struggling for composure, while Rachel nearly bit through her tongue.
Evelyn looked genuinely stunned for perhaps the first time in years.
Rachel's grandmother marched directly toward her carrying a fresh plate of dumplings.
Sit down, she ordered. You clearly haven't eaten enough carbohydrates to behave kindly. I don't sit.
To the absolute disbelief of every executive present, Evelyn Shaw slowly sat down.
Rachel stared at Sean. Did your mother just get conquered by dumplings? Sean looked equally astonished. I think so.
The atmosphere shifted strangely after that. Not softer exactly, but less poisonous. Neighborhood aunties resumed conversation at full volume while Evelyn endured being interrogated about why she never remarried and whether Sean ate enough vegetables as a child. Rachel watched the surreal interaction unfold while trying unsuccessfully to stop smiling. Your grandmother frightens powerful people, Sean murmured beside her.
She once chased a debt collector down 3 blocks with an umbrella. Remind me never to disappoint her.
Rachel laughed quietly, but when she looked up again she caught Sean already watching her with an expression that immediately made her heartbeat stumble.
It wasn't playful anymore. Or merely protective. There was warmth there now, unmistakable and steadily deepening. Rachel looked away first. Unfortunately, that did nothing to calm the heat rising into her face. Later in the evening, the dinner split into smaller conversations throughout the penthouse. Musicians played softly near the windows while snow drifted beyond the glass skyline. Rachel stepped onto the balcony briefly for air, only to find Sean already outside loosening his tie beneath the winter lights. "Escaping your own party?" she asked. Sean exhaled slowly into the cold air. "I forgot how exhausting wealthy people are." Rachel joined him at the railing. "The aunties like you. That's more terrifying." She laughed softly before silence settled between them again, comfortable and intimate now rather than awkward. Far below, headlights traced silver lines through snowy streets. Sean glanced toward her after a while. "You okay?" Rachel considered the question honestly. "I think I've experienced 6 months of emotional damage in 3 days." "Fair assessment." She smiled faintly, then hesitated. "What you said earlier, to your mother," Sean looked toward the city again. "I meant it." Rachel's pulse quickened instantly. "Sean, this started as a contract." "I know. And your life is complicated." "Extremely. And eventually reality's going to return." Sean turned toward her fully then, expression calm but unwavering. "Rachel, I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted things from me. Fame. Access. Status. Favors." His gaze held hers steadily. "You offered me leftover fries and knitted gloves." Rachel tried to joke to diffuse the intensity gathering between them. "Very luxurious." Sean stepped closer. "You looked at me when everyone else looked through me." The city noise faded beneath the quiet certainty in his voice. Rachel's throat tightened unexpectedly. "You barely knew me." "Exactly." He smiled faintly. "That's why I trust it." Rachel looked down for a second because his eyes were becoming dangerous to maintain eye contact with. "You know," she murmured, "normal people usually flirt before emotionally devastating confessions." "I'm out of practice." "Clearly." Sean laughed softly under his breath. The sound warmed the cold air between them. Then his expression gentled again. "Tell me honestly. If you had known who I was that night at the subway station, would you still have stopped?" Rachel answered without hesitation. "Yeah." Sean held her gaze for a long moment after that, something shifting visibly behind his composure. Slowly, carefully, he lifted one hand toward her face as if giving her time to move away. Rachel didn't. His fingers brushed lightly against her cheek, warm despite the winter air. "You're incredible," he said quietly, almost like the realization surprised him. Rachel's breath caught hard enough that she could hear it herself. The distance between them narrowed inch by inch. She could see every detail now, the tiny scar near his jawline hidden beneath fading beard stubble, the exhaustion still lingering beneath his eyes, the vulnerability he showed almost nobody. Sean lowered his forehead gently against hers. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. Rachel's hands tightened slightly against his coat. "I don't want to." That was all the permission he needed. Sean kissed her softly at first, carefully, like someone approaching warmth after years in the cold. Rachel felt the world narrow instantly to the pressure of his lips and the steady hand at her waist pulling her closer. Nothing about it resembled the polished romance scenes Sean acted in films. This felt real in all the messy, dangerous ways reality always was. Rachel kissed him back before she could overthink anything, fingers clutching the front of his sweater while snow drifted silently around them. Sean deepened the kiss slowly, emotion breaking through his composure in quiet waves. Rachel could feel how restrained he usually kept himself, how controlled, and how much effort it took for him to let go even slightly. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, neither spoke immediately.
Sean rested his forehead briefly against hers again and laughed once under his breath.
This definitely violates the contract.
Rachel smiled shakily.
Pretty sure the contract exploded 3 emotional crises ago.
Sean looked genuinely happier in that moment than Rachel had ever seen him.
Not triumphant. Not glamorous. Simply relieved. Like someone who had been holding his breath for years and finally exhaled.
The balcony doors suddenly slammed open behind them.
Rachel and Sean jumped apart instantly.
Her grandmother stood there holding a tray of sliced fruit and looking deeply offended.
I leave for 5 minutes and you children start making out in freezing weather?
Rachel nearly died on the spot.
Grandma!
Sean actually turned slightly red for the first time since she'd met him. The old woman marched toward them unimpressed. At least take a coat if you're going to romance dramatically. She shoved the fruit tray into Sean's hands.
And feed my granddaughter. She forgets to eat when emotional. Sean accepted the tray obediently.
Yes, Grandma. Rachel covered her face while Sean fought visible amusement. The old woman narrowed her eyes suspiciously at both of them.
You two kissed properly, yes? Grandma. What? If I'm paying for musicians, I expect genuine chemistry.
Sean fully lost control then and burst into laughter so sudden and sincere that Rachel could only stare at him. It transformed him completely. Years seemed to disappear from his face all at once. Even her grandmother softened watching him. There, she said quietly.
That's the first real smile I've seen from you. Sean's laughter faded gradually.
Something emotional flickered across his expression before he looked away briefly toward the snowy skyline. Rachel suddenly understood his happiness tonight frightened her slightly because it felt fragile, hard-won, and entirely genuine. Before the moment could settle further, one of Sean's assistants burst onto the balcony looking pale.
Mr. Shaw, he said urgently. There's a problem downstairs. Sean's expression sharpened instantly back into focus. What happened? Daniel June is here.
Rachel froze.
The assistant continued nervously, he's demanding to speak with Ms. Lin privately. Sean's entire demeanor changed at once, warmth vanishing beneath dangerous calm. Absolutely not.
Security tried removing him, the assistant explained, but he's threatening to release private photos of Rachel online if she refuses to meet him. Rachel felt sick immediately.
What photos?
Sean looked toward her sharply.
Rachel?
She swallowed hard.
Daniel used to take pictures constantly during our relationship. Some personal. Sean's jaw flexed visibly. How personal? Rachel looked away. Enough.
Silence fell for exactly 2 seconds before Sean handed the fruit tray calmly back to her grandmother and started toward the balcony doors.
Rachel caught his arm instantly. Sean.
He looked at her, and she almost stepped back because fury burned beneath his composure now unlike anything she had seen before.
Nobody threatens you, he said quietly. Not anymore.
Then he walked inside toward the elevator while Rachel stood frozen behind him, suddenly realizing Daniel June had just made the worst mistake of his entire life. Rachel hurried after Sean through the crowded penthouse while guests instinctively moved aside the moment they saw his expression. The warmth from the balcony vanished completely now, replaced by a tension sharp enough to vibrate through the air.
Sean walked with terrifying calm toward the private elevator while assistants scrambled behind him issuing rapid instructions into headsets. Rachel caught fragments as she struggled to keep up. Shut down all exits. No. Phones in the lobby. Get legal upstairs immediately.
The elevator doors opened to the ground floor reception hall where chaos waited beneath crystal chandeliers.
Daniel stood near the entrance arguing with security guards while several reporters filmed discreetly from behind decorative pillars.
Vivian lingered nearby looking pale and nervous, clearly regretting coming at all. The moment Daniel saw Rachel emerge from the elevator, his expression shifted instantly into wounded desperation.
Rachel, he called loudly. Finally. Sean stepped slightly in front of her before she could answer. Daniel's confidence faltered visibly under Sean's stare but recovered quickly. This is between me and my fiancé. Ex-fiancé, Rachel corrected coldly. Daniel ignored her entirely. Rachel, these people twisted everything. We need to talk privately.
Sean spoke for the first time, voice dangerously quiet.
You threatened her. Daniel forced a bitter laugh. I just wanted her attention. By blackmailing her with private photos?
Sean took one slow step forward.
Security guards immediately straightened nervously. That's not attention. That's coercion.
Vivian tugged weakly at Daniel's sleeve.
Maybe we should leave. No, Daniel's eyes locked desperately onto Rachel now. You can't seriously be with him. This is revenge, isn't it?
Rachel stared at the man she once planned to marry and felt something unexpected, nothing.
No longing. No heartbreak. Just exhaustion at how selfish he remained even now.
You cheated on me for 6 months, she said flatly. Then lied publicly to protect yourself.
Daniel spread his hands dramatically. I panicked. You humiliated me. I said I'm sorry.
Sean glanced sideways toward Rachel briefly. Interesting apology strategy, he murmured.
Daniel's face hardened. You think this billionaire celebrity actually cares about you?
Rachel almost answered immediately, but Sean spoke first.
More than you ever did.
Silence slammed through the lobby again.
Daniel laughed harshly. You barely know her. Sean's expression never changed.
I know she worked double shifts while helping support her grandmother. I know she keeps extra food in her bag because she worries strangers might be hungry. I know she apologizes before asking anyone for help because people spent years making her feel inconvenient.
Rachel's chest tightened painfully. Sean continued calmly.
And I know you betrayed someone loyal enough to love you when you deserved it least. Daniel looked genuinely shaken now because none of the polished power plays he understood seemed effective against someone who saw through him completely. Rachel herself felt overwhelmed hearing Sean describe her so clearly after such a short time.
Daniel's desperation curdled instantly into resentment. This is ridiculous, he snapped.
You're acting like some hero because you're rich enough to destroy people.
Sean's gaze cooled further. No.
I'm acting like a man protecting someone you tried to humiliate. Daniel's voice rose sharply.
She's not innocent either.
Rachel stepped around Sean before he could respond.
You know what, she said quietly. You're right. Everyone looked at her.
Rachel folded her arms slowly. I ignored obvious lies because I wanted the future you promised.
I defended you when people warned me.
I kept shrinking myself smaller so your family would tolerate me.
Her eyes hardened now. That part is my fault. Daniel stared uncertainly. Rachel took another step forward. But cheating on me? Publicly lying? Threatening private photos?
Her voice sharpened.
That's entirely yours.
Vivian suddenly spoke up from behind him, sounding rattled.
Daniel, enough. He rounded on her instantly. Stay out of this.
The way he said it, cold, dismissive, contemptuous, made something crack visibly across Vivian's face.
Rachel noticed it immediately. So did Sean.
Vivian looked around the silent lobby, at the reporters, the security guards, the powerful celebrity standing beside the cousin she betrayed, and finally seemed to understand that Daniel valued nobody except himself. You told me Rachel was obsessive, Vivian whispered.
Daniel scoffed impatiently. Because she was. You said you ended things months ago. Vivian, you said she wouldn't let go.
Her voice rose shakily. Rachel watched realization spread across her cousin's face in real time like ice breaking apart. Daniel grabbed her arm harshly.
Stop talking. Sean's expression darkened instantly at the grip.
Before he could move, Vivian yanked herself free violently.
You lied to me too? Daniel lowered his voice urgently. Don't start this here. Here? Vivian laughed once in disbelief. You dragged me here.
She looked suddenly smaller than Rachel had ever seen her, stripped of arrogance and performance. You told me Rachel embarrassed you because she was unstable.
Daniel ran a hand through his hair aggressively. Can we discuss this later? No, Vivian snapped. Answer me now.
Reporters leaned closer, instantly sensing blood in the water again.
Daniel noticed too late. Rachel almost pitted him for exactly 1 second.
Then he turned toward her with renewed bitterness.
Fine. You want honesty?
His eyes flashed angrily.
Rachel was never enough for my world. She still isn't. Sean moved before Rachel could react. One moment he stood beside her.
The next he had crossed the distance and slammed Daniel backward against the marble wall hard enough to shake nearby decorations.
Gasps erupted throughout the lobby.
Sean's hand twisted in Daniel's collar while his voice remained terrifyingly controlled.
Listen carefully, he said.
The only reason you're still standing is because Rachel deserves peace more than you deserve consequences.
Daniel looked genuinely frightened now.
Sean leaned closer slightly.
So here's what's going to happen.
You will delete every photo, message, backup file, and cloud archive involving Rachel within the next hour while my legal team supervises.
Daniel swallowed hard but tried maintaining pride. Or what? Sean's eyes turned absolutely glacial.
Or I introduce the authorities to your offshore accounts personally.
Complete silence followed. Daniel's face drained white. Vivian looked horrified.
Rachel realized suddenly that Sean must have investigated far deeper into the June family than she imagined.
Sean released Daniel abruptly and stepped back. Choose carefully.
Daniel stared at him, breathing hard. Then, for the first time since arriving, he looked uncertain instead of arrogant. Vivian stepped away from him slowly. You told me we'd become powerful together, she said numbly.
Daniel looked incredulous. You're abandoning me now? Vivian laughed bitterly. Now.
Tears filled her eyes suddenly, though whether from shame or heartbreak Rachel couldn't tell.
You were using both of us the entire time. Rachel expected to feel satisfaction watching her cousin unravel.
Instead she only felt tired.
Vivian looked toward her hesitantly. Rachel held up one hand. Not tonight.
Vivian nodded slowly, unable to meet her eyes anymore. She turned and walked out of the lobby alone,